Often, eugenics is simply reduced to being the political wing of social Darwinism. Nothing could be further from the truth, because while the two do overlap, as we will see, eugenics emerges out of Galton's understanding of natural selection's relationship to human culture and civilization. There are still some clear differences, not least that in the early 20th century, with eugenic proponents like Charles Davenport, focus almost entirely upon the germplasm, the expression for genes, while barely paying any attention to Darwin's theory. Of course, once Darwinism and Mendelianism came together in the 1920s, social Darwinism and eugenics allied and become very difficult to separate in theory or in practice. Now, in this module, we're going to focus upon Galton's development of eugenic theory before moving on in subsequent modules to explore the neo-Mendelians and the US eugenics movement. The etymology of the word gives a clue to its meaning. It combines the prefix eu, the ancient Greek for good, and the suffix genes, meaning born. Put the two together, as Galton with his classical education did, and you get well-born. As Galton's mission statement had it, the well-born programme would consist of the study of all agencies under human control which can improve or impair the racial quality of future generations. It's hard to talk about Galton without talking about his relationship to Darwin. His family tree indicates that he was part of the wider Darwin-Wedgwood clan and was therefore related to Charles. Younger than him, Galton appears to have idolised his half-cousin, especially his scientific achievements, which spurred him into thinking about the brilliance, even the genius, of the Wedgwood-Darwin family. He was a strange man, Francis Galton, a polymath inventor of some mental instability, with a boy's own backstory. The immediate branch of his family were Quakers, but strangely for this pacifist faith, they were also gunmakers as well as bankers. He was a child prodigy. He was a child prodigy, fluent in reading at 2, adept at the ancient classical languages by a young age. Like his half-cousin, he started off training as a doctor, but after a couple of years' study, he changed tack and went to Cambridge to study maths. At Cambridge, he had a nervous breakdown, so he took an ordinary degree rather than honours and returned to medicine. However, like Darwin, he didn't stick at it. The death of his father in 1844 had made him financially independent, but also desperately restless. During this period, he travelled, explored Africa and the Middle East. In 1845-1846, he visited Egypt and travelled down the Nile to Khartoum in the Sudan. He then made his way to the Holy Lands and then on to Constantinople. In the early 1850s, he put together an expedition to explore southwest Africa, now called Namibia. His account of this expedition, Narrative of an Explorer in Tropical West Africa, won him the Founder's Gold Medal from the Royal Geographical Society and effectively established his reputation. Shortly after his return, he married Louisa Jane Butler. Although they remain married, it seems to have been a rather loveless relationship. There were no children, and some suggestions that Galton himself may have contracted a sexually transmitted disease while overindulging himself on his travels. Whatever else we can say about Galton, one thing is absolutely certain. He was not only brilliant, he was brilliantly eccentric. Just looking down this list of experiments and inventions is enough to make one giddy. Aside from the Galton whistle, which tested the audible range of humans and animals. My personal favourite is the efficacy of prayer experiment, where he decided to test whether prayer worked or not. The experimental design was brilliant. If being prayed for resulted in longer and better life, he reasoned, then those to whom prayers were offered on a regular and systematic basis would be the longest lived and the most healthy. As it happens, in the Church of England, there is a section of the service where the royal family and the archbishops and bishops of the church are routinely prayed for. Comparing these to individuals who were of equal rank but generally unprayed for, he revealed that prayer had no efficacy whatsoever. There was other more important stuff that isn't on this list, especially the statistical innovations he developed to help him understand evolution and its impact upon humanity. Statistical regression was central to his eugenic thinking and was initially developed to help prove Darwin's theory of pangenesis, although it really ended up doing the opposite. But it was the publication of Origin that really spurred him into action. He was inspired by his relations work and set about a two-pronged attack on improving the stock of the human race. He established that mankind had it within its power to intervene in nature and develop reproductive strategies that would improve the characteristics of the human race. Rather like those improvements made by the breeders who so fascinated Darwin. Done correctly, the progress of the human race could be ensured. Galton looked towards a time when all people would be white, Anglo-Saxon geniuses. He started his work on heredity in the 1860s, publishing a piece in Macmillan's magazine, which would serve as the blueprint for his later work. Now, as we can see from these quotes, by the mid-1860s, a few short years after the publication of Origin, the issues of animal domestication and breeding and the lessons to be learned from these practices for the future health and welfare of the human race were already crucial to Galton's developing theory. These initial forays into the relationship between human breeding practices and the inheritance of intelligence culminated in 1869 with the publication of Hereditary Genius, an inquiry into its laws and consequences. We can do no better than to look at his forthright, no-nonsense introduction, which laid it all out on the line. 1. A stable race of geniuses could be created by careful selection using similar methods to the breeding of dogs or horses. 2. This would be achieved by judicious marriage over several generations. And 3. It would put a halt to the degeneration that Galton saw going on around him, which he discusses in some detail in the book. The evidence for his argument was based upon the study of eminent British men, particularly judges, and whether their eminence ran in families like, surprise, surprise, his own. His conclusions were that eminence and therefore genius did indeed run in families. Their genius obviously extended to the fact that they made judicious choices in marriage, making unions with other families of eminence. The fact that this text of eugenics begged the question so many times makes it extraordinary that anyone would bother listening to what it had to say. But we will see this time and again. Biological reductionism has its own appeal, and a certain caste of mind likes to see sociology reduced to biology, and in Galton's case, biology reduced to... But we will see this time and again. Biological reductionism had its own appeal, and a certain caste of mind likes to see sociology reduced to biology, and in Galton's case, biology reduced to statistics. It would take him until 1883 to come up with the name which he unloaded upon the world in inquiries into human faculty and its development in a footnote. Here, for the first time, he presented an argument for direct intervention into human reproduction. Inquiries is a strange book, as it appears to be a compendium of much of the research he had undertaken in all those strange areas. These included his experiment on prayers, but the thrust of it was that there was no destiny laid down by an almighty God, and that the future was in the hands of Homo sapiens. For him, this meant encouraging the people with the right traits to breed. And to further this program, he established his anthropometric laboratory in 1885, which subjected people to a battery of tests and measurements to ascertain their biological fitness. It was the want of these records that Galton felt keenly, and his laboratory was a step towards achieving this. The laboratory survives to this day and is based at University College London. The textbook works on eugenics will always differentiate between positive and The textbook works on eugenics will always differentiate between positive and negative eugenics. The textbook works on eugenics will always differentiate between positive and negative eugenics. Positive eugenics seeks to encourage the right people to breed, while negative eugenics institutes programs that prevent people from breeding. And while it was obviously possible to be both, Galton, with his liberal English sensibilities, was resolutely on the side of positive eugenics. He saw no place for state intervention other than through the collection of data that would allow for people to make good reproductive decisions. In this sense, Galtonian eugenics could be seen to be close to the social Darwinistic aim of non-intervention. But as we will see, this was oh so different to what emerged in the USA and many other countries in the early years of the 20th century. And at the heart of the new impulse to impose negative eugenics upon undesirable populations lay neo-Mendelianism, and forms the subject of the next module.